What does classical education mean?
I think classical education is a nod to the past,
Yeah.
looking at the classic works,
Yep.
as they're called, and that's suffering today because of trying to marry classical and modern. We're beginning to call modern books certain kinds of classics.
Yeah.
Right? Diary of a Wimpy Kid's going to be a classic soon.
Yeah.
Maybe. Maybe not.
Yeah.
And I hope not. But
50 Shades of Stupid.
yeah, 50 Shades of Stupid might be a classic. And that would be terribly disturbing, but I'm seeing books that are not very good being called classics now. So we're in danger there. So when we say classics, we're talking about the Western canon, the Bible, the great Greek tragedians, the epic poets, those guys.
Yeah.
And I believe that's meant to be, we're going to study Latin, Greek, Hebrew, the ancients, all the way up to the present.
Yeah. So there might be some people who are listening to us and they think, well, that sounds all really sophisticated and quite frankly a little snooty. Why is it that I need to be bloody learning Latin or Greek or any of this stuff? Tell me when I'm ever going to be actually using this in real life. It doesn't seem practical. Why bother with Latin and Greek and these sorts of things?
It's a fair question. If you look at what Joseph Pieper said about education, he said, an education, to be academic in the true sense of the word academic, it has to be philosophical and it has to be theoretical. Philosophical meaning that it has to be speculative, and theoretical meaning its end has to be truth. For these things to be true, he says, you can't have a single practical consideration because you learn truth for its own sake. The liberal arts are things that help the human flourish and therefore their own sakes. For their own sakes. And a language like Latin that is so inflected is, it helps cultivate a sense of logic. It's an ancient language that was very concise about making laws, helping to make laws. And there's a really beautiful relationship between reading and law.
Okay, tell me what
if you look at the Latin word for law, it's lex.
Yeah.
If you look at the Spanish word for law, it's ley. If you look at the Spanish word for reading, it's leer. Leyenda is a legend. Legend, law, they're very closely related. And in fact, Plato, he said, he talked about, I think it was the Cratylus, he talked about the fact that language, in general, words are natural signs. There was a debate about whether words were natural signs or whether or not they're just contrived and made up by man.
Yeah.
And this is a very important debate in education.
Yeah.
And he suggested they were natural signs and that not everybody was in a position to name things because of certain capacities. And he ended up saying that the poets, he called them lawmakers because when they defined a word essentially rather than nominally, they were making the law about what things really mean. Not the lawgiver. The lawgiver is the one creator. The lawmakers are the ones who help express it. So I think that was beautiful. And there is a deep connection between, if you look at a map, it says legend. The legend helps you read the map.
Yeah.
If you don't know the legend, you can't read the map. So that legend can be likened a little bit to the liberal art of grammar.
Okay.
You need to know the rules of the map before you can read it.
Yeah, my kids are being able to just like look at words and see the Latin roots now. You know, it's like, oh, so that must mean this because it comes from the same thing, which is kind of cool.
There's endless benefits. I'll just say one more thing about
please.
it. Goethe said, you can't know your first language until you know your second. There's something very beautiful about acquiring your second language and then seeing, this is why grammar is important.
I barely know English as an Australian.
Right. We're working on it.
Yeah, one day at a time. Knowledge for its own sake, that reminds me of the first line of the Metaphysics of Aristotle. All men by nature desire to know.
Right.
And then I think it's a line from the Republic where I think Socrates says of education, when it comes to things like sport, if you impose like physical exercise upon somebody, it doesn't do them much harm. But if you impose education on a young mind, it can do great damage. And so he says something like, therefore, let their education be like play, to some effect. Do you know where I'm getting at or where I'm referencing?
I do.
How does this apply to all this, do you think?
Well, it's been...
Desiring to know for its own sake and so on.
Well, I think it's self-evident that all humans desire to know, and we delight in knowledge. We delight in encountering a truth. We delight in that. All humans do.
Yeah.
And I think that that idea of play has been taken and really reduced today because we do have this ideology in the public schools that children should just play. And the truth is we should play. But when we say play, we could be talking about video games or we can be talking about out in the woods. And out in the woods is a lot better play than with video games. And there's a drastic difference between the two, right?
Do you think a lot of our education in modern education isn't just knowledge for the sake of knowledge? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Like, again, back to that first line from the metaphysics. Desire by nature to know, knowledge for its own sake. You know, like
right. I don't think that's the public schools.
Yeah.
But I think that is education.
Yeah.
To come to encounter the truth.
Right.
Yo, thanks for watching. You can watch the entire episode on YouTube if you want. You can listen to it at The Matt Fradd Show by subscribing on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And feel free to support me, patreon.com/MattFradd.